Let's take a closer look at Nik Silver Efex. It's the application that gives you that darkroom experience for developing black and white images. I absolutely love this application because you can not only do tonal control, exposure, but you can also emulate film, grain, and emulsions. You can work with color channels. You can add finishing touches that emulate different types of papers that you would print on, Silver Efex, etc. It is really the ultimate in black and white image editing. And so what we're going to do is go through a series of images to really dive into the different filters and effects that you can use. So to start with, I have put things in the workshop images folder. If we go into Silver Efex, there are several different images that are here that we're going to be using in this lesson. We're going to start by opening Denesia. And so in this lesson, just like the last lesson, we are going to go through Photoshop because it is the application that gives us the most flexibility for editing images in the Nik collection because of how we can layer different effects. So what I'm going to do, we're going to grab this Denesia.tiff image, drag that into Photoshop and open it up. I've got my Nik Collection 6 palette right here ready to go. So what we want to do is we want to open this in Silver Efex. So I'm going to zip over here, click on Nik Silver Efex, and this is going to open this image. So we're going to use this image to sort of explore the interface and how Silver Efex works. So on the left-hand side, we have 64 presets ready to go. These are combinations of settings that Nik has created for us to create stunning black and white images right out of the box. So let's just do this. I'm going to click on a few of these just to show you what happens to this image. We can go in here and say, hey, high structure. It gives us that. We can go and do a low-key image. And these are also categorized by classic processing. So we have underexposed, overexposed, high and low key, some of those things that were have been around for many years. We've got modern processing. So this is a full dynamic range harsh image. There's harsh transitions. We've got some smooth transitions that we have here. Full spectrum. You can sort of explore these. There are 10 that have been updated for the 25th anniversary of the Nik collection. I love this one. This is cool tones. So what I challenge you to do is just go through and start exploring these, clicking on these. These thumbnails are going to give you a preview of what the image will look like when you're done. But you can see just by clicking on these, I get some really stunning effects right out of the box. When we click on the preset on the left, it's applying different adjustments to these filters on the right. To begin with, we have global adjustments. So these are tonal controls for the entire image. So they're brightness and contrast and clarity. Underneath that, we have contrast adjustments. So contrast adjusts the difference between the darkest and the brightest area in an image. So if you increase the contrast, the blacks are going to get darker and the whites are going to get whiter. But in Silver Efex, what we can do is we can adjust certain areas of contrast. So we can just dive into the highlights or the whites and adjust the contrast there, or just in the blacks and adjust the contrast there. So we have finite control. So we can adjust all of the contrast or just parts of the contrast. It's really amazing. The other thing we have here that's really interesting is soft contrast. So in a black and white image, we have transitions from absolute black into midtones and into whites. And sometimes when you adjust your contrast, you get harsh transitions. Soft contrast allows us to add contrast by keeping some smooth transitions between the blacks and the midtones and the whites. So we have a choice of how we apply contrast. I absolutely love how the contrast adjustments work. We also have structure adjustments. Structure adds, let me just show you what structure looks like. So when we go in here and take the structure slider left, or try to take the structure slider to the right, we see more details, things like the eyelashes. In fact, I'm going to take this to a nice angelic faded look and maybe even a neutral. We'll do a neutral just so you can see this. As we go to the right, notice how all the skin texture, the eyelashes, the eyeball, everything becomes really pronounced. It's similar to sharpening, but it's a more of an intelligent way to sharpen an image. It's adding structure to that image. If I take that to the left, notice how things get soft and sort of smooshy. So it's how punchy do we want this image to be as far as the details in our image. And like the tonal controls, we can adjust our structure just in specific areas. So we can say we only want to make more details arrive here in the highlights. So we can adjust that. Or we can say we want to do that in the midtones or the shadows or the blacks. We have just a lot of control of how this works. And we even have a slider here for fine structure. So that's looking at really small details like eyelashes and hair and finite cracks in rocks and texture. When we say we just want these really fine details to be magnified, that's what fine structure does. We also have tonality protection. And so as we're adjusting our tonality, changing our exposures brighter or darker, we might want to say, hey, lay off those shadows. Don't make big adjustments there. So we can protect those by sliding this tonality slider for the shadows to the right or the highlights to the right. We can say, hey, lay off that. Let's preserve what we already have. We have a lot of control in this application. We have some selective adjustments as we do with all the other Nik Collection apps. We'll go into those a little bit later. We also have clear view. That takes images that are a little bit soft and foggy and clears them up. It's exactly what it sounds like. And then we have color filters. And so black and white images don't start out as black and white images. We always have color when we capture an image. So in the olden days, we would put filters on our lens, red and green and yellow filters, so that we could get more contrast depending on the scene. That is absolutely true of Silver Efex, and we have a demonstration. We're going to walk all through these color filters and show you how they work to really dive in and get the most out of your images. It's a really, really powerful tool. And then the last thing we have here, we have film types. So we can add two different things. We can add a film grain, which emulates just the grain that would be in an old film stock. So if a higher ISO film, you have more grain. A lower ISO, it's a much finer grain. That really is pronounced in black and white photography, and it's a really pleasing look. So sometimes you want to just add a little bit of grain. But when we used to have film cameras, we used to buy films because of the emulsion and how that film emulsion, the chemistry on that film would interpret scenes. Sometimes you get nice smooth contrast, sometimes it was really harsh, sometimes it was sort of overexposed or underexposed. There were all kinds of things that you could do just by the film that you put in your camera. And Silver Efex, it emulates all of that stuff. And so we're going to show you as we go forward how this film emulsion works and how we can reproduce some of that stuff, and then dive in even more with the color channels. And then we can also look at how the levels and curves are mapped to those old film emulsions. It's really spectacular. Okay, so what we're going to do here, we've looked a little bit at these different controls. Oh, there's one more thing I need to talk about. That's the finishing adjustments. So finishing adjustments are there so that you can make your photo look like it was printed on maybe a silver plate or sepia paper or different inks. And so you can take and you can tone your images so it's more of a selenium. You can have a blue toner, you can have silver or copper or whatever you want. So you can really take your image and make it exactly how you want it to look. So all of that is built in. So now that we know what all these different filters are on the right, it gives us a better understanding of what's happening over here with these presets. There are intelligent combinations or formulas that DxO and the Nik team have put together so that you can just click on this and get some of those old film looks with just, well, one click. I absolutely love it. So take this image of Tunisia, go through these different things and explore that. I think you're going to see that you really love that. The other thing that you can do, because there are 64 different presets here, you can actually filter and search for these. So let's do that. So I'm going to click on neutral. So we have a neutral black and white image here of Tunisia. And then what I'll do here is I'm going to search for sepia. Let's see what we have as far as sepia. So I'm going to type in sepia, and then we have dark sepia, and we have a soft sepia. Ooh, soft sepia looks really good. So one click, I already love what I'm getting. Or we could go in here and look, maybe we want to work with some portrait presets. So I'm just going to type in portrait, And there we go. We have a classic and some cool tones and some Hollywood glamour and some rugged. So all different types of presets that are created for portrait black and white photography. And you can see that even if you don't want to mess with all the filters and all the settings on the right, you can with one click get some really amazing looks just by using the built-in presets. And as with all the other Nik collection apps, we have custom presets that we can create. We have imported presets, so if we want to share, we can import those. And then our last edits and our history shows up just like it does in the other apps. So the interface works the same across all of the apps, and it's just a wonderful experience. Okay, so let's get going and start working with Silver Efex. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cancel this image, and I'm going to close that without saving. And then I'm going to go into my Finder, and we're going to try something different. We're going to open this image, sophia.tiff. So this is a TIFF image that you can use. And I want you to understand a couple of things about this image. Notice we have a bunch of red in this image, and we have some green over here, and we have some skin tones, and Sophia is a little reddish. That's her skin tone. And so what we're going to do is we want to convert this to a black and white image, but we want to know how we can work with these different colors so that we can change the contrast. So think of black and white images in terms of color when you're processing them, because it'll make a big difference to how this works. I'm going to click on Silver Efex and open this image in Silver Efex, and then let's just sort of walk through this. So by default, this is going to come in as a neutral image with no changes at all. I'm not going to apply a preset. I'm going to go through this one by one and just make some minor adjustments, and then we can compare those by clicking on the compare button. So what we're going to do here is starting with global adjustments. Let's just get everything adjusted to start with. And so what we'll do here is I'm going to bring out the midtones just a little bit. So that's going to be increased by about 15 or 20%. You can sort of see that starting to pop out there. I'm going to open up my shadows a little bit by about, I don't know, 10 or 15%. You can see that that's starting to get some of that contrast that we want. And then I want to adjust my brightness, but I don't want to adjust all of the brightness. So this is the overall brightness. I want to use something that is more intelligent. This is dynamic brightness. So that's going to help me take a look at some of the areas that are a little bit darker in the image and bring those levels up. But levels that are already bright, it's going to leave those alone. It's dynamic. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to take this dynamic brightness, and I can either take it up or I can take it down. And in this instance, I want to take it down because I want to add a little bit more contrast. So we can start seeing this image is starting to have some minor improvements, but we can go in and start working with our contrast. So we want more contrast. So if I go to the right, that's too much. So I'm going to bring this in just a little touch, about 20%. We can start seeing that it's working there. Notice though that her shirt is starting to block up. We're losing detail in that shirt. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the soft contrast, and I can increase that, which I don't want to do, or I can decrease that. So by decreasing that to, I don't know, 20 or 30%, we're starting to open up some of these shadows and the transitions in her shirt. So we really have control. And as we go to the compare before and after, we're starting to see that contrast, especially in her arms and face. It's showing up. So what we want to do now is add a little more detail. You can see we're going step by step down these filters on the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start working with our structure. So structure all the way to the right. Whoa, way too much, right? But you can see what the structure does. Look at her eyes. They get really poppy there. If I take that structure to the left, it's really soft. So it depends on what you want. I want this to be a really gritty image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this up till I think it's about almost overdone, but about 50%. You can look at those eyes before and after. Wow, what a difference that we're already getting there. The highlights in this image, I think, are just too much. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take these highlights in the structure, I'm going to take that down just a little bit. So about, I don't know, 20 or 30% until it looks good. I like to go in from fit to 100% just to really see what I'm doing to the image. And so I can see if these minor adjustments are exactly what I want. That's pretty good. Don't be afraid to compare before and after to see what you're getting. I think these midtones need a little bit of work. So I'm going to take these guys down just a little bit, about there. So let's see what we did. Oh yeah, now we're seeing that start to punch quite a bit. And then what I want to do is make sure that all of these little hairs and eyebrows and all that stuff is really pronounced. So I'm going to take that up quite a bit. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep pushing it. I'm going to keep pushing it. Yeah, okay. That really made a difference. Look at that. We're really starting to see things. You can even use the slider to see left and right. You can see a huge difference in the contrast of this image by what we've already done. So I'm going to go back to our normal mode here. And then what we want to do is let's explore these tonality protections here. So I want to protect the shadows. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to slide that to the right. I'm going to go all the way to the right. You can see how everything sort of brightens up in the shadows. So I just want a little bit more out of those shadows. So I'm going to protect about 25%. I'm saying, hey, just don't do too much in these areas in the shadows because I want to sort of preserve what we've done. That looks pretty cool. Okay, now we're about to see where the magic, in my opinion, happens in Silver Efex. So right now what we've done is we've adjusted some of the tonality and the texture and the clarity. But really, the amazing thing, in my opinion, about this application is the film types that you can apply. So we're going to go down here to the film types, and they start with neutral, so nothing is applied. And then we'll start with the lower sensitivity, ISO 32 and 50, 100. So the higher the ISO, the higher the sensitivity in film, the more grain, the more contrast. So you can hover over each of these things to see how this film emulsion would apply to this image. And so maybe you like really high ISO stuff, so you can go there and see exactly what it looks like. It looks like an old vintage. Ooh, I like that. The other thing you might want to do is go into 100% when you're previewing these to really see how this is going to affect the image. So you can choose whatever it is that you like. So for me, I think this image, I wouldn't have been using a high ISO film because it was outside. So I'm going to choose something around maybe a 2 or 3 or 400. So I think, yeah, I think that's pretty good. So this is a Fuji Neopan 400. So it's going to emulate Fuji Neopan 400 film, that film stock. So if we look again at before and after, we're starting to see some things. Notice underneath the film types, we can still go in and make it our own. We can change the grain per pixel to make the grains larger or smaller. So the smaller the number, the bigger the grain is going to be, how hard or soft the grain is. But this right here is one of the magical things. It is how that film emulsion responds to certain colors in your image. And so Nik has gone through, DxO has gone through and made sure this matches what it would actually be like, but we can change. So remember, her shirt was red. We had some green over here, some red back here. Watch what happens when I change the red sensitivity slider. So as I'm going left or right, I'm affecting the red areas in the image. So if I know I want more contrast, if this was blocked up, I'm like, her shirt shouldn't be that dark, I can just adjust the reds in this image and preserve everything else. Or this was some green trees back here. If I go and I change that, so we don't, I guess that's not too dark of green, but we can play with that and it looks pretty darn good. Now you might have noticed that we have film types and then we also have film grain. What's the difference between film type and film grain? Well, a film type does all of that mapping that we just talked about. It looks at the grain of a normal film stock, a real life film stock, and the emulsion, how it reacts to all the colors, how sensitive it is, how it interprets the scene. So that is a film type. It's more than just grain. Film grain is just film grain. It's just the grain over the image. You're not going to have the sliders to work with the different color channels. You're not going to be able to do levels and curves and map everything out. It's up to you. Sometimes you just want some grain, but for me, I'm almost always adding a film type, not just a film grain. Okay, so this looks pretty darn good. I think the finishing adjustments are just right. I don't think we need to do any toning, but we could if we wanted to. We could make this a blue, we could make it a coffee, we could do all kinds of things. So, ooh, I like that coffee, that looks pretty cool. So you can do a before, an after. Let's go in 100% because I love the way Sophia's eyes look at this. It just really looks like an old film stock shot. Before, after, before, after. I absolutely love it. That's the workflow I use for developing classic portraits. And so I just sort of start at the top, all my global adjustments, and then I fine tune and fine tune and fine tune all the way down the right side of the application until I finally get to my finishing touches and the image looks great. If I need to, I can always go back and change things. If I love what I've done, I can always save that as a preset for later use. In fact, if we go in here, you can look in my Silver Efex that I have many custom presets, and I've named these after the models that I've worked with. So Adriana, we did a bunch of stuff, so I've got a fine art process. But you can create all of your own presets. So normally what I do when I am working with a new image is I'll go and try one of my presets because it's sort of the style that I like, and then adjust to the right from there. So what we're going to do, we just did a portrait. Let's do some scenic photography. So what we're going to do here, I'm not going to save this. So I'm going to hit cancel, close without saving. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to my workshop images, my folder here. And then we have this Bolivia DNG. So I'm going to take that, drag it into Photoshop. And then once it opens in Photoshop, I'm just going to say open. It's a DNG file, so it's going to open in Adobe Camera Raw by default. Now I have this image that I shot in Bolivia, and it's sort of interesting, but I think we can get a lot more out of this. So what we're going to do, once again, let's hop over into Nik Silver Efex. Now that we're here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a preset. So again, by default, when the image comes in, a neutral preset is applied, which means there's nothing applied at all. It's just at neutral settings. So what we're going to do is I want to go in here and use a preset that I really like, and the name of the preset is Full Dynamic Smooth. I know that because I've used it a ton of times. So I'm just going to type in full, and here it is, Full Dynamic Smooth. It's smooth because the transitions from black to white are nice and gradual, as opposed to harsh. This is harsh. So we're going to do Full Dynamic Smooth as a starting point. So the first thing I want to do in this image, you'll notice that there's really no detail in the clouds here. It looks sort of soft. It's not very clear. So I'm going to use clear view. I want to increase that to not a lot. If I did, it's too much. Something about, I don't know, 15 or 20%, just to give me a little bit more to work with as a starting point. Okay, I like that. So before, after. So we've added some punch just by using that clear view slider. The other thing I want to do, sometimes I will start with the film type instead of ending with the film type, and that's what I want to do with this image. So I'm going to go down here to film types, make sure that's open. And then I'm going to look for something that's a really low sensitivity, because I would have shot this in daylight, probably something in the ISO 100 range. So I think there's an Ilford in here that I really love. Yeah, the Ilford Pan 100. So I'm going to click on that. So we're starting to see a lot of contrast, but we need to fix this sky here. It's just not there. And so let's do one other thing here. So I want to do some tonality protection. And so what we'll do is we'll take these shadows and we're going to take that down to 0. So you can see that I'm getting more in the shadows by saying, hey, don't protect those shadows. I want to apply the changes that I've made to the shadows. Okay, so we've got something that's pretty interesting, but let's start working with this sky up here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a control line. So I'm going to take my control line from my selective adjustments. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just going to put this here-ish. So it's sort of in line with the mountains. I'm going to take my picker here and I'm going to say, let's focus on this sky here. I'm going to rename my control line to sky. And we can take a look at what we've selected, and it's the top portion of the image. That's pretty much what I want. I don't really have to worry too much about making any changes to how selective this is. I just want this to be a nice gradual filter here. So like a graduated neutral density filter is what I'm going to be applying here. So then what we can do is we can start changing what's above the line. So the brightness, let's take that brightness down just a little bit. So let's just see where we go. So okay, about 40–45% is pretty good. I think if we added some structure, we're going to get some more. Yep, starting to come through there. Let's amplify our whites. So we're going to take that, we're going to go down. So we're de-amplifying. So instead of making the whites brighter, we're making them darker by about 20–25%, just enough so we're getting detail in the shadows here. And then let's increase the structure, the fine structure, just a little bit. I don't want to overdo it, but that looks pretty good. Now I can start changing my control line here so it's exactly what I want. If I want to see what I'm getting with the control line, all I have to do is go to my control line. There's a little checkbox. I can turn that on and off, and you can see, wow, that's pretty cool. I think it's too much there, so I'm going to raise it up, and then I'm going to rotate it just a little bit like that and fade that out just a little bit more. Okay, that's pretty darn good. I like how that works. We've got everything. I think what we need to do here, our brightness is pretty good. Yeah, so now that we have that, let's make some more global adjustments. So I think what we need to do is in our global adjustments, let's look at our midtones. So we're at negative. Yeah, let's bring those up just a little bit more. Yeah, okay, now our mountains are starting to come out. You can see just sliding these midtones, how that's changing. It's changing the entire image, by the way. So we're doing that. That looks pretty darn good. And then let's play with this dynamic brightness. So I'm going to take that up just a hair to about 20–25%. Then I can start looking at before and after, before and after. We're really getting punch out of this image. I think we're ready to look at the finishing adjustments here. So I'm going to go all the way down to finishing adjustments. And then I think what I want to do with this, let's see if we can make this a little bit, yeah, a little bit warmer, maybe some blue or brown tones. So that coffee that we looked at, oh, I think this is good. This number 13 here, that looks pretty good. So we can see before and after, before and after. That looks great. It's sort of a process of just repeating steps over and over until you get exactly what you want. And so make some adjustments, stand back, look at the before and after, make some adjustments, stand back, look at the before and after until you get exactly what you want, and you're going to get something that looks like this. I absolutely love it. Okay, what we need to do now is let's talk a little bit more about working with colors in our image, specifically those color channels. So what we're going to do here is, if you want, you can save this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to close this without saving, and I'm going to close this out of Photoshop here. I'm going to go back to our workshop images, and we have one more image that we want to work with. This image is named Abosh, so I'm going to bring that into Photoshop, and I want you to look at this image, specifically at the colors in this image. So we have this bright red wall, we have some light green pillows, we've got this strong light coming from the side. Because we have this strong light coming from the side, I think it's a great candidate for changing into a black and white image. But what we have to be careful of is Abosh's head blending into this wall. If we don't do it right, if we don't work with these colors, then everything's going to blend together. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my palette, and I'm going to go into Silver Efex. Silver Efex is opened, and so again, it by default will open with a neutral setting, so none of these sliders have been changed. And so we can see that Abosh has a nice contrast between his head and the background here. And so what I want to do though is, before we do anything else, let's start looking at this color filter down here. So I know this is a red background. So if we click on red. Just clicking on red, you'll see that we can change what that background looks like. So we can make it white, we can make it much darker, we can make it somewhere in between. So we're just affecting that wall, that red wall, to either add contrast or subtract contrast with this color filter. It's really cool. I'm going to click this little loopy arrow here to reset that. The other thing I can do is I can just slide the hue slider and then maybe make this strength a little bit larger to see which colors are affected at which point in the spectrum. So if I'm not sure what color I want to work with, I can just slide it around. And so by putting this into the green hues here, you can see that, oh, this is not good. His head blends in with the background. I don't want that. That's really, really, really bad. So let's reset that. Let's check out green. So if I go into the green, which is opposite of red, you can see that I'm still affecting that red wall back there. And so we can play with these until we get the exact contrast that we want. Let's play with this. So I'm going to go and show you a couple of things that will happen. So I'm going to go type in spectrum, do this at home, follow along with me, and I'm going to click on full spectrum. And what I want to show you is what that does. This preset changes the sensitivity of all the different color channels down to -70%. So look what that does to the image. If I do the inverse of that, so I'll click on full spectrum inverse, it does the exact opposite to all of these color channels. It makes them 65% on the positive side. So by playing with these, you can sort of see what happens to the color interpretation of our image. And then once you get there, again, you can always go in here and play with these sliders. Now by default, when you add any type of film type, so I'm just going to go pick one at random here, you'll see that DxO has created the sensitivity sliders to match the film stock that you've chosen. So this is how the film would have reacted to these colors. So what you can do is you can always go in and change how things behave, either here in the film type sensitivity sliders, or you can still go up here and play with the color filter. So however you want to do that. So now we have this really gritty street photo of Abosh with all that grain. How cool is that? Just by clicking on some film stock and playing with those color sliders, it really works really cool. Okay, let's get a good image out of this. So what I'm going to do here, let's do this for real. I'm going to set this back to neutral. I'm going to fit this so we can see the entire thing. Let's go in here and choose a film type. I think an Ilford, maybe a Pan 100 would be great. Yeah, here we go. That's pretty good. Let's take the highlights down just a little bit in our overall adjustments. So I'm going to take our brightness adjustments, the highlights down just a little bit, not too much. And then let's increase the midtones. Let's open that up a little bit more. That's pretty good. And then we need a little more structure. I really like structure in my images. So I'm going to increase that by about 15 or 20%. And then let's just take a look at the blacks. Take that down to maybe 5% just to give it a little bit more punch. It's looking pretty cool. Let's add a color filter though. So I'm going to go in here and let's go into the green channel. And I'm going to increase this, decrease it to sort of get the contrast in that wall back there. Yeah, so see I'm opening that up just a little bit. So that looks pretty good. One thing that sticks out to me is this pillow is too bright. It's taken away. I want this to be dark, so we go from bright all the way to dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a control point, click on the pillow, and because I've just clicked there, the control point is smart enough to know what the heck I want. So I'm going to just take that brightness down a little bit. There we go. That looks pretty good. Before, after, just saying, hey, in this area, let's make that a little bit darker. I think that looks pretty good. So what we've done here, we didn't add a bunch of film grain, we didn't add a bunch of contrast. What we did do is we went into the color channels to make sure that we adjusted the colors so that we got the max contrast possible. So let's do this. Let's take this, we're going to just convert this to a smart object and apply it. There's one thing that drives me nuts with this image. I do not like it, and that is that Abosh has a toothbrush out here. So just to make sure that this is a good image, I'm going to crop that out of there. Let's get rid of your toothbrush, Bosch. And let's make sure his head isn't flying off the screen. Something like that looks pretty good. Okay, now we have the image that I think we would like to have. And that is our finished image. I absolutely love that. We can turn this off and see that full screen. It looks great. Well, we have learned a lot of things about Silver Efex. We've learned about the presets, how we can just click on those and get some great results. We've learned about film types and emulsions and working with color channels, adding different grains, and then working with our tonality and making sure we have all of the structure in the images that we want. We can make it really gritty, high contrast, or nice and smooth and very subtle. The choice is up to you. I encourage you to use these images and play with this. You're going to learn that you absolutely love Nik Silver Efex. Okay, we're done with Silver Efex. Let's move on to our next app.